And the main ones are the anxious type and the overthinking type. And you might think that's very similar, but actually they show up a little bit differently. I mean, the anxious type can have some overthinking, and overthinking can have a little bit of anxiety, but actually they're very different. And I found that out through the Chinese medicine aspects, how it's rooted differently. Like the anxious type is all about the water and the fire, the kidney and the heart, being wide awake and simply not being able to go to sleep and having anxiety and even feeling the heart being activated. And from the functional medicine perspective, I find that is just a purely activated nervous system and anxiety, probably the cortisol rising a little too much in the evening. You know, we're tired in the afternoon and then we find ourselves having too much energy or getting a little too excited. Or I always say good news, bad news, it doesn't matter. Those people can't talk about anything in the evening because it takes this much to get them activated. And the overthinking type is a little different. They sometimes almost fall asleep. They toss and turn. They can't really read a book. They can't really they're not very functional, and they're having thoughts that they just ruminate. Some of them, they don't make any sense. Their head might be stuck on a song, or suddenly they start thinking about random things throughout the day, or maybe just one thought that they keep ruminating on. And again, as opposed to the anxious type, they can't really even read a book. They're just so tired. And you can see, yeah, anxiety is part of that, but overthinking is more important. With those people, I find that digestion is very, very important. Even if they don't have a lot of digestive symptoms, that ruminating, in Chinese medicine, when we think about digestion, we don't just think of digestion of food and nutrients. We also think of digestion of thoughts, processing. So when we have a hard time processing and we keep regurgitating thoughts, like we don't have, I don't know how many stomachs the cows have, 3 or something. We're not meant to do that. We're meant to process once, let go. And sleeping helps with that, but sometimes we can't get past a certain point. So that's again more related to digestion, and you can see it's subtle, but it's different. Did you hear the difference between the anxious and the overthinking, how it can be different?
I think you did a nice job distinguishing the two from each other. So both the anxious and the overthinker can actually have trouble falling asleep at the beginning of the night. So when you say that digestion is involved, can you break that down in sort of modern medicine, layperson terms? Like, what would you recommend to somebody who's of either of those two types of insomniac?
So for the overthinking type, when they have trouble falling asleep, first allowing enough time in the evening to wind down. And we all know that that's such a common thing, but sometimes we say we need an hour to wind down, and that's just not enough time. So allowing maybe a couple of hours. And for the overthinking type, what seems to be really helpful is to around 5, 6, 7 o'clock, so way earlier, to write down all the worries and thoughts that they have in their mind. Just have on their phone or a piece of paper, just keep writing down just random thoughts. And it could be things that we can solve immediately or things that need to get done tomorrow. It could also be things that we don't have a solution for, but just writing it down really helps. And then by 8, 9 o'clock, you should have pretty much run out of thoughts. And if the same thought comes in or later at night, then you can tell yourself, it's on that piece of paper. I'm going to give myself a break tonight, and I'm going to come back to it tomorrow, whatever it is. Like, this is just for me. So that's more from the sleep hygiene kind of aspect.
I love that. So you do the brain dump.
Yes.
And that really does clear your head, and it doesn't require you to write, pages and pages. Like for me, it's bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, okay, these are the things that I keep thinking about. Let me just put them down. And as soon as I put them down, it just sort of calms down in my brain. So it's an easy thing. It could just take a few minutes, but it really makes a powerful impact on your ability to kind of clear the mind prior to going to bed. So great. Do you want to tell us about the other 3 types of insomnia?
Yeah, I was going to tell you a little bit. So the overthinking and the digestion. So then you can look into digestion, and when we think about food and digestion, yes, it's important to eat healthy, but sometimes it goes way beyond that to see if we have any gut issues, imbalanced bacteria, acid reflux, perhaps, or intestinal permeability issues. We talk about intestinal permeability issues and boundaries. And so telling yourself, it's got to stop right here. This is my boundary. I do not have to ruminate over this, and the night is for me to rest. That's about boundaries too, but it's also about intestinal boundaries, literally. So looking into that. So see how it's all connected, physical with the emotional and mental.
So I think it's really cool that you bring that up because, you know, in functional medicine, we learn that boundaries, barriers in the body are really important, whether it's the lining of the gut, the respiratory system, or the skin. But I love how you weave in, you know, personal boundaries around you know, what you're willing and not willing to do. And I think a lot of us with multiple sclerosis actually have trouble with setting boundaries. We overextend ourselves all the time. We, you know, take care of others without taking care of our own needs, even if we don't want to. You know, we do the things maybe we don't want to do, and then maybe even feel resentful. So the concept of boundaries is one that's really, really important. So even mental boundaries, I would put under important barriers or boundaries in the body.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It's very important. And then the anxious type, I think one of the most important things to do in the evenings is also to allow enough time to wind down, but really notice your body, because I find that with the anxious type, there is a certain sleep window. If we miss it, that's it. It's like, then you're going to be up for hours. So it's very important to listen to the body. The same thing, wind down more, listen to a meditation, try not to doze off before the time is right, because if you doze off even for 5-10 minutes, the body will perceive that as a nap. And then it's going to take much longer to fall asleep. So meditating earlier in the evening, doing quiet activities, not having important conversations with partner before bedtime, they're common things, but they happen all the time, to even when we try not to. And reading a paper book, it really helps to quiet the mind for the anxious type. And getting into that routine and not expecting that if I do it 1 or 2 nights, it's gonna solve it immediately. It takes time for the nervous system to get the message that, oh, everything is safe, it's okay, there is no big problem. And sometimes it just takes a little something or a thought to put one over the edge. So we have to be very careful at the beginning.
So what you're saying actually should make us start thinking about our bedtime routine starting way earlier than 1 to 2 hours before bed. In fact, I always tell my patients, your bedtime routine starts the moment you wake up,
Yeah.
right? And so there are things I'd like people to do to set themselves up for success. And like you said, it's not a 1-for-1. If you exercise today and spend time outside and do your brain dump at 5 p.m., that you're going to get great sleep. It takes a week or two of you really kind of getting into the rhythm of it before the nervous system, the immune system, the hormone system all get the message that, okay, this is now we have a good environment that promotes sleep. So let's do that.
Yeah. And that's one of the main reasons why I wrote this book, is because it takes multiple. It's not, people sometimes want the one thing that will fix their sleep, be it an herb, a supplement, a habit that will fix it all. And sometimes when we're good sleepers and we just have one bad night, sometimes it doesn't take much to put us back in a good track. But if you struggle with sleep issues for a while, it's likely not one thing. And so I hear a lot of people being frustrated because they try to do all the right things and it's still not enough. And that's because it's likely not one thing. It's usually 3 or 4 or 5 things. And I think it's one of the functional medicine practitioner or doctors or teachers that, where I've heard this analogy about sitting on the 4 or 5 thumbtacks. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, tell me.
Like if you sit on 5, like say 4 thumbtacks, and
Oh,
those
I know what you're talking about, but tell
yeah,
our listeners.
yeah, thumbtacks are, let's say, root causes. It could be your sex hormones are not quite right, you're watching too much TV in the evening, you're also ruminating too much, and it's just or you don't have enough vitamin B6, let's say. And so those are the root causes. So, but anyways, you're sitting on these 5 thumbtacks and you take one out and you think, wow, if I take one out, I should feel so much better, right? And in theory, you're like, yeah, it's one less, but really doesn't hurt much less. So you have to take care of all of them. And that's what I do with my patients too. I tell them like, well, I've tried it and I've tried that. I said, we have to try them all together. We have to look at all together and give them a month or 2 or 3. And then it's going to get better and better, because that's the holistic approach.
I think people also need to understand that when we use pharmaceuticals that are really powerful, you can get away with just Ambien.
Yeah.
But when you're using lifestyle and natural therapies, you need to use many things to get power and synergy out of it. So very rarely do I see a patient who has one thumbtack sitting on
Yeah.
one thumbtack, right?
Yeah.
It's always like 5, 10, 20 thumbtacks, right? And you have to start sort of peeling away the onion and just keep working at it, because I'd like to believe that our bodies are actually programmed to sleep. It's such a foundational state that promotes our health.
Yes. Yeah. And with the pharmaceuticals, which they're wonderful sometimes when you need them, because when you can't sleep, you feel like you're going insane sometimes. It really messes up with your mental health. Sometimes they're really helpful. And like you said, they're really powerful. They're overriding your nervous system. They're kind of knocking you out. And when we look at the body holistically, we're trying to nourish your body. So then your body can do it on its own, so you're not dependent on things. Yeah, certain things might be beneficial long term, but generally we're encouraging the body to do what it does best. It's functioned very well on its own.
Yeah, just keep supporting, right? And even if you don't get to perfect sleep habits, if you even get 50% of the way there, like that still translates to a lot of benefit. So it really makes sense to keep working at it. And it's so fascinating to learn about the 5 types of insomniacs. So shall we move on to some of the others?
Yeah, so before I move on to the rest of them, also I want to say that it gets a little trickier, but both the anxious and the overthinking can show up in different parts of the night. And it's very interesting that sometimes people say, well, I can't fall asleep and I wake up too early. And it's the same root cause. Like if they're wide awake, they're anxious, they can't fall asleep. And then some of them say, and I also wake up too early, but I'm not wide awake. I just feel anxious. I toss and turn. And it's the same root. And then when we treat it, both get better at the same time. So that's absolutely fascinating. And